Introducing Dr. Park. Where to start? So, Dr. Park is currently an assistant professor of political science at Ohio State University, received her PhD from NYU in 2015. She's published extensively on conversational dynamics in congressional hearings. In particular, her work on against standing has received high praise in a number of outlets and has appeared in American Political Science Review, Journal Politics, and the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Her work has also been covered by the Washington Post 538, and she has received the Best Paper Award from the Legislative Studies section at the American Political Science Association. I've always been a fan of Dr. Park's work, and so I have been begging her for at least 2 years since I took this position at Purdue to present as part of her video workshop series. So her appearance is certainly a triumph on my end because I've always been eager to have her as part of our video series. Before I introduce Dr. Park, I just want to remind everybody that on April 19th, we'll be having our third presentation of the video workshop series for this semester. It is Nathan Kelly, who I guess now is a professor at the University of Notre Dame, even though I need to double check that. But I've known Nathan since he was a full professor at the University of Tennessee, and he's presenting a paper which looks at examining floor speech patterns in the congressional record. But let me stop sharing my screen. We have a few more people in the queue, and we will let those folks in as the talk progresses. But for now, let's turn it over to Dr. Park. Dr. Park, take it away.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, Bryce, for inviting me to as part of the speaker series. I'm very interested in your work as well, so we're liking each other's work. All right, today I'm going to present a paper with Pamela Ben and Hye-Young Yu on bureaucrats testifying in Congress. Let's go. So existing theoretical studies on relationship between Congress and the executive branch heavily focus on the question of which branch tends to have more policy relevant information and when and how this information is shared between these two branches. Typically, bureaucrats tend to have this informational advantage against Congress because they are the ones who implement the policy. So they tend to have more on-the-ground knowledge about the realities of policy implementation and its consequences. So Congress has this benefit of this incentive to relax this informational asymmetry by requesting information from bureaucrats, especially at the early stage of policymaking to avoid any policy drifts. However, sometimes Congress's incentive to collect that information and bureaucrats' incentive to share that information can be affected by the partisan incentives that both sides have. In general, studies find that the partisan disagreement between the two branches tend to affect their relationship. For example, the divided government increases tension between the two branches by dampening the legislative productivity and increasing congressional oversight over the bureaucracy, or it even reduces the degree of discretion given to the bureaucracy. So likewise, partisan divide between Congress and the executive agency may introduce party conflict into the information sharing between the two. So while theoretical research has developed dense discussion on when the information transmission from bureaucrats to Congress is facilitated, their scholarship relatively lacks empirical examination of the same question. So in this paper, we propose to systematically analyze this classic, but nonetheless important question through the lens of the partisan incentives. One formal way through which Congress can request and receive information from the bureaucracy is holding committee hearings. and inviting them to testify in these hearings for both legislative and oversight purposes. Let me move this a little. Let me. Is it high?
Yeah, it seems like your slides might not be advancing.
Oh, okay.
People have sent me some of these messages.
All right.
Double check that, but sounds great so far.
And indeed, our previous research shows that bureaucrats are the type of witnesses that are most frequently invited to committee hearings. So in this graph, the red bars at the top represent the proportion of bureaucrats invited to committee hearings over the past 60-year periods. So this shows the overtime trend. And many congressional observers generally think that committees tend to hold hearings for members' grandstanding opportunities to score political points. But in certain circumstances, legislators hold hearings to collect evidence-based information from external experts. And we can see that from this example quote. Here.
Yeah, sorry, just to pause for a second. Yeah, it's like I'm just seeing the first like introductory slide at this point, so I assume that you're showing other things. But can you try advancing the slides?
Okay, let me.
Yeah, no problem. I just that now I'm convinced that I'm not seeing things correctly. Ah, perfect, much better. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. So we can see that from the example quote from the chairman of a Senate committee at the beginning of the COVID pandemic crisis back in March 2020. And here he says, I have one goal today, and that is accurate information that we should know about everything about coronavirus. And for this hearing, the committee invited 4 witnesses, and all of them were from relevant bureaucratic agencies, including our famous Dr. Anthony Fauci. So there are various types of information that bureaucrats can provide to Congress, but in this study, we focus on the transmission of analytical information, because that's the information most closely linked to the policy expertise, and it is central to the development of technical policy. So, but then how do we conceptually define the analytical information? So consistent with the existing literature by Kevin Esterling, we conceptualize it as the information that uses falsifiable statements on a policy under consideration. And in this paper, we make 3 major innovations. First, as I stressed already, despite the extensive theoretical study on interbranch relationship in their information sharing, an empirical examination of this question has received less attention. So our paper contributes to advancing our empirical understanding of this interbranch information sharing. In some existing empirical studies that came close to studying this question, mainly focused on the oversight, congressional oversight, but not on the legislative activities. However, Congress requests information from bureaucrats on both oversight and legislative matters. So unlike the previous studies, we analyzed the informational flow on both the oversight and legislative hearings. Also, those studying oversight activities mainly relied on counting the number of oversight hearings that were held, or the number of days that the oversight hearings held, to indirectly capture the amount of information that was transmitted between the 2 branches. However, in this paper, we take an innovative step forward to study this question by measuring not only the amount of information, but also the quality of information by analyzing the testimonies that witnesses provided during the committee hearings. And in our previous work that was published at APSR, we generated a similar measurement using a dictionary method. and didn't actively use that measurement for the main analysis. But in this paper, we construct a new, more sophisticated measurement using crowdsourced supervised learning method. Then how would the partisan incentives influence the information sharing between the two branches? So first, the interbranch relationship, the information, interbranch information sharing can be impeded under the divided government compared to the unified government because of the strategic interactions between legislators and bureaucrats who are driven by different electoral and policy goals. Under divided government, each branch is likely to experience the difficult policymaking environment because the other branch that their party does not control may have different policy preferences. Then the legislators, especially the majority party members, may turn their focus towards messaging activities during hearings, which may potentially come at the cost of information-seeking activities. And my previous research finds that minority party members tend to grandstand more than majority party members in general. So the increase in majority party members grandstanding in the hearing process will only stimulate minority party members to grandstand even more, making both parties focus more on messaging under divided government than under unified government. So we expect that the less information will be shared from bureaucrats to Congress under divided government. Second, we also expect that the interbranch partisan divide may affect the individual level interactions between a bureaucrat and a legislator. Because of the heightened partisan competition for majority status in Congress as well as White House in recent decades, legislators are incentivized to look for every opportunity to make the other party look bad and make the next election favorable to their own party. So whether one is under divided government or unified government, a presidential out-partisan legislator is likely to ask questions of bureaucrats in a more aggressive tone and increase the political messaging to criticize the president's party, whereas presidential in-partisans are more likely to request information that may be helpful for policymaking. And since the agenda and all other aspects of hearings are deliberately designed by legislators, the witnesses can speak only if they are asked to answer legislators' questions. So the discourse occurring in hearings tend to be predominantly shaped by legislators. However, the literature on strategic bureaucrats suggests that they may shirk sharing information on questions posed by legislators whose policy preference diverges from the White House. That is, in this case, presidential out-partisan members. And the bureaucrats may be more willing to respond fully to the questions posed by the presidential co-partisans. So given both legislators and bureaucrats' strategic incentives, we expect that less information will be transmitted between bureaucrats and presidential out-partisan legislators than between bureaucrats and presidential co-partisan legislators. And in addition, we expect that this effect of interbranch preference alignment will be stronger when the testifying bureaucrat is a political appointee as opposed to career bureaucrats, because legislators may find closer link to the president when they are interacting with political appointees. So when presidential out-partisan legislators are motivated to publicly criticize the administration, they are more likely to target political appointees than career bureaucrats. And also political appointees' position may be subject to the president who appointed them remaining in power. So which makes them more sensitive to current political environment compared to careerists. So for these reasons, we expect that the effect explained in the second hypothesis will be stronger among political appointees. To test these hypotheses, we start by merging two data sets. One is our data on witnesses who testified in congressional committee hearings, and the other is House hearing transcript from my previous work. And first, using our witness data, we identified bureaucratic witnesses who testified in hearings and matched their affiliation information to one of the names of the executive departments or independent agencies. And using the OPM data, we distinguished political appointees from career bureaucrats. So we present a new data set on bureaucrats who testified in hearings that allows analyzing the features of bureaucratic agencies for the first time in the literature. So this graph shows the number of legislative hearings and oversight hearings where the bureaucrats appeared to testify by their departments. And this graph here shows the number of bureaucrats who, by their type, whether they are political appointees or career bureaucrats, again, by their departments. And as an outcome variable, we construct a new measure that captures the level of analytical information conveyed in the witnesses' testimonies using House committee hearing transcripts and a crowdsourced supervised learning method. And we define witnesses' statements as analytical if it is fact-based, verifiable through research or data-driven analysis, or objective. And we also provide a definition of what is not analytical. And we define a statement to be non-analytical if it is opinion-based, normative, or anecdotal, or experiential, subjective, or preferential. And this is all consistent with the existing literature. And to measure this concept, we generated over 40,000 random pairs of witness testimonies and asked Amazon Mechanical Turk workers to choose one that sounds more analytical based on our coding instructions. And using them as a training set, we ran 8 machine learning models, including support vector machine, kernel lab support vector machine, lasso gradient boosting machine on 2 different document matrices. One is based on plain backup words document matrix, and the other is doc-to-back representation of text, which is based on word embeddings. And using an ensemble Bayesian model averaging technique, we aggregate them to construct the final model, which is basically giving a weight to each of these 8 models. And 6 out of 8 models received non-zero weights and contributed to the final model. And using the final model, we predict the analytical score for the rest of the corpus and rescaled it to range from 0 to 100. To validate our measurement in our final model, we take the human-coded labels of the test set of around 400 paragraphs that were not used to train machine learning models, and compare these human-coded labels to the scores that are predicted by our final model on these 400 paragraphs. And their correlation coefficient is as high as 0.8, suggesting that our final model successfully captured the human-coded labels as we intended. And to substantively validate our measurement, we read the most and least analytical statements in our data. And this is the most analytical statement. And it talks about the details about a policy program that a witness manages to run and the budget allocated to each part of the policy program in detail. And the one below is the least analytical statement. And here the witness kept saying, I don't know about something, and suggesting that our measurement of analytical information effectively captured the latent trait that we intended to measure. And here is a distribution of the predicted scores for the entire corpus, which has a bit skewed bell-shaped distribution. And the first graph here presents the distribution of the analytical score by executive departments, and the one in the second, in the right side is the distribution of the score by independent agencies. And we can see that the agencies like NSF and NASA show higher mean values than other agencies, which provide additional substantive validation of our measurement. And then by identifying the legislator who made a statement preceding a witness's testimony, we created a legislator witness pair level data. So the unit of analysis now is the legislator witness pair that interacted with each other in each hearing. Then we merged legislator level, community level variables to these this pair level data. And our two key independent variables capture partisan alignment. The first one is the indicator for divided government, and the second one is the indicator for whether the legislator asking question in that pair was a presidential out-partisan or not. Then we consider whether a bureaucrat witness was a political appointee or not, and interact that with the indicator for the presidential out-partisan legislator. And we also control for the potential confounders. And in some model specifications, we control for legislators' speaking styles using the grandstanding score from my previous work, which measures the intensity of political messages conveyed in legislators' statements during the committee hearings. And also we capture legislators' use of analytical words based on the dictionary for these words that we introduced in our previous work. And we also control for legislators' sentiment. And although not perfect, by controlling for these variables of capturing legislators' speaking tone in the analysis, we can test whether bureaucrats' strategic incentive to share or not to share analytical information varies depending on our key independent variables, interbranch, partisan alignment, even after controlling for legislators' messaging or information-seeking intentions as much as possible. And then we also control for other witness level and hearing level variables. And to add more control to the analysis, we add fixed effects for these different variations. And this table presents our main results. Consistent with our theoretical expectations, we find that bureaucrats tend to provide less analytical information under divided government and when they are interacting with presidential out-partisan legislators. So the coefficients on these two variables are negative and statistically significant in both legislative and oversight hearings. However, when it comes to the interaction effect of the political appointees, we only find the interaction only in the oversight hearings. And this is probably because bureaucrats tend to confront more contentious environment in oversight hearings than in legislative hearings. So the partisan incentives might be more salient in oversight hearings relatively. Additionally, we ran the same set of regressions with witness fixed effects to see if the same witness tends to vary the level of information they provide depending on whether they are responding to a legislator who is out-partisan as opposed to partisans in the same hearing. So we find consistent results even after adding the witness fixed effects, which provides more stronger support for our theoretical claims. And we also wonder, would this pattern be specific only to bureaucratic witnesses, or would it be a general pattern that we can observe from other types of witnesses? So as a placebo test, we conducted the same set of analysis on non-bureaucratic witnesses. And we find that non-bureaucratic witnesses tend to share less analytical information under divided government, but then that is limited only to legislative hearings. And we don't find the effect of the interacting with presidential out-partisan legislators. And so this set of results suggests that interbranch relationship has a unique effect, especially among bureaucratic witnesses. And we conducted additional interesting analysis on bureaucratic testimonies. First, our main analysis focuses on the partisan alignment between Congress and the president, assuming that bureaucrats are under control of the president, so that they tend to share similar policy preferences as the president. And under this assumption, we looked at the partisan misalignment between the two branches at the branch level, which is captured by the divided government indicator, and also at the individual level. However, literature reports that bureaucratic agencies have different ideological leanings, such that some executive agencies are more aligned with the president than others. Also, committees have different ideological leanings, so there is variation across committees. Therefore, it is possible to test whether the ideological distance between committees and the bureaucratic agencies affect the level of information transmitted as well. So for this analysis, we use Chen and Johnson's measurement for bureaucratic agencies' ideology. And we find that less information is shared as the ideological distance between the committee median and the bureaucratic agency increases. But that is limited only to the oversight hearings. Second, our main analysis showed that less information is shared when the questioning legislator is partisan, presidential out-partisan, and this was more so when the bureaucratic, when this was a political appointee as opposed to a careerist. But for the same theoretical reason, here we additionally test whether the witnesses from the bureaucratic agency that is ideologically more closely aligned with the president also tends to show this effect more strongly. So when here, we now interact the presidential out-partisan indicator with the indicator for the agencies aligned with the president's ideology. And we find a negative and significant effect on these interaction terms, which suggests that the negative effect of interacting with a presidential out-partisan legislator is amplified when testifying bureaucrat is from an agency that is more closely aligned with the president's ideology. And third, we examine whether the information transmission is impeded on more polarized issues, because partisan tension is likely to be stronger on these polarized issues. So for this study, for this task, we constructed the level of polarization on each policy issue that is defined in the comparative agendas project dataset using legislators' roll call vote records. And we divide the level of issue polarization into 3 groups, top, bottom, medium, and then merge this to our hearing data. And we subset the data by the level of each polarization into 3 groups and fit the model of our main analysis. And this figure presents the coefficient on the indicator for presidential out-partisan legislators. And we find that less information is transmitted when presidential out-partisan legislator is asking, especially on highly polarized issues. And this pattern is more salient in legislative hearings. So this study makes two major contributions. First, since the quality of information can shape policy decisions with far-reaching consequences, especially in complex scientific issues that we recently faced, like climate change or pandemic responses. So understanding the information sharing in government is very important. And our research reveals new important dynamics in it by empirically testing important theoretical expectations on the information sharing between the two branches. And we do so by producing to the large data set on bureaucrats who testified in Congress for almost 6 decades. And by introducing a new, highly sophisticated measure of analytical information conveyed in all witnesses' testimonies. And we believe that this measurement can facilitate empirically testing many existing and new informational theories on when and how Congress can collect and publicly transmits policy-relevant information. In summary, this paper demonstrated that partisan misalignment between bureaucrats and Congress can impede the interbranch information sharing, which may undermine the quality of policymaking and thus they negatively affect institutional effectiveness. Thank you very much for listening. I would appreciate any comment.
Excellent. Thank you so much for a fantastic talk. The easiest way to handle questions is to either type them into chat or raise your hand and you can turn on your mic and ask away. So I have many questions myself, so I will start just to kind of get the ball rolling as people think a little bit more about the presentation. So first, this is fantastic work. I mean, it really is. Like, I think that the substantive contribution of this paper cannot be understated. Like I loved your work on grandstanding, but to show that partisan misalignment affects information sharing within congressional committees is a very significant substantive finding. And so I applaud you and your team for putting in the hard work to make that possible, especially given the data set that you were able to compile. Secondly, I will say that the way that you presented your ensemble machine learning algorithm is textbook. Like it's literally like I'm going to put this on my text as data class syllabus because it's a very great demonstration of for practitioners who are interested in machine learning. It's a really good way to convey all the things that you need to convey when it comes to machine learning to demonstrate the robustness of your methodology, and the way that you've done that in this talk and in this paper is a really good metric for any graduate student or anybody who's used that interested in this method. So with that said, so the first question that I have is more broad. So it is, from your perspective, as somebody who's done a lot of work within congressional committees, and you've now taken it at another kind of substantial angle, what do you think is the value of these committees in 2024? So, and this is not meant to be a critical question. It's more about, now that you've looked at congressional committees and congressional committee hearings in two very significant ways, where are you at in your own thinking about the role that congressional hearings have to play within the institution and the goals of members of Congress? I know that's like a book level question, so feel free to take, a small piece of that, but I think everybody would really benefit in your insights about your thinking on congressional hearings.
So I'm expanding my research that would look at the over time trend of the the members' grandstanding efforts and their engagement in information seeking efforts. By expanding the data to run from 1960s, that covers the period before polarization started. So I'm planning to look at this overtime trend in their behavioral patterns starting from 1960s. And with these measurements, I'm trying to infer the role of congressional committees and their hearings overall, whether they are really information-seeking institutional apparatus, or whether they are increasingly used for the grandstanding political theater. So that paper will be really answering your broad question, but also as the technical development of the broadcasting, what's going on in hearings through C-SPAN, and the social media postings that members can use more freely and more easily and frequently. I think the hearings provide members with more opportunity to gain media attention through the technical development. So that is another way that the reason why we tend to see more grandstanding, but we will see if there is any statistically significant increase in members grandstanding over time, so that the use of the congressional hearings is more geared toward that political purpose than the institutional purpose that is designed in the initial setup of the institutions.
That's great. And so, yeah, Jesse, go ahead.
Unmute. Okay. Yeah, I just actually want to build on that, and also ask a broader question. I've got some other, methodological questions that were interesting to me. Curious about like whether you had hearing fixed effects, whether that affects any of what you're observing, just because you could imagine, two different types of witnesses talking differently in the same hearing, or there being a hearing. Like I do worry a little bit about network effects, where if someone like raises a really negative tone, that sort of ratchets up the emotion in the room, and then somebody else might respond. So that's why I was thinking about sort of hearing level fixed effects. But the broader question that I'm even more interested in that, even though I obviously care about methodological questions, is have congressional hearings outlived their usefulness? Is there a better way? Asked differently, is there any informational value to doing congressional hearings in the year 2024? Are members of Congress and their staff actually learning about policy areas by holding hearings, or would they be better served to move to a model like the APA, that the bureaucracies use, where they solicit written feedback and things like that? Maybe I'm too cynical, but it seems to me the two big benefits of them are, one, grandstanding, which you've written a lot on, and two, it's a good that you can give out to your lobbyist buddies. I mean, this is something that they sell to their clients, is look how many times I've given congressional testimony. So they're basically like free favors that members of Congress, particularly committee leadership, can give out. And so I'm just curious, ask the broader institutional question, and I think Bryce was pushing that direction. I'll push even further, because you've been in these data for so long and know them so well, and know this space so well. I'd really love to hear your perspective.
Oh, thank you for the question. So even though there might be a slight increase in the use of hearings for a grandstanding purpose, I think still the committee members are using some of their hearing opportunities to seek information when they confront some the situations that require them to seek information from external experts. So this paper is addressing that part of the purpose of committee hearings. So I would direct your question to look at more of like conditional conditions that make that encourage committee members to seek information and conditions that would encourage them to do grandstanding more. So there might be committee variations across issues. And so these, looking at those variations across the context will be better way to look at the question.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So, yeah, I'll let the questions keep percolating a little bit. I have another one just because, like I said, I'm a big fan of work. So if if this paper crosses my desk as a reviewer, it certainly is going to be to review the methods that you employ vis-a-vis text analysis within the paper. And so to put you a little bit on this, I'm assuming that you'll probably get a question about, why didn't you use a recurrent neural network to classify your documents? Don't you know that recurrent neural networks is the new hotness when it comes to machine learning? And so I think that the approach that you use is perfectly appropriate and is very, very effective. And so so I think the better question to ask is not like, why didn't you use a recurrent neural network? I think the better question is, what are the strengths of ensemble classifiers when it comes to machine learning?
Mm-hmm. So I used this method several years ago. So I try to use the machine learning models that were most recently developed at the time. And I used R package that involves multiple machine learning models in one suite of the package. And I used the models that are, all the models that are available for continuous dependent variable rather than classifiers. And since I tried out multiple models, I needed a way to combine these models in the most optimal way. And that was the ensemble Bayesian model averaging technique. And that significantly improved final model's prediction compared to any independent individual model that I tried out. But certainly when I expand the data and construct these variables once again using the new set of data, I will use more advanced LLM models like BERT or even more developed ones.
Well, what's excellent about the thought of ensemble learning is that you're correct. Like, I've taught a Texas data class for a very long time, maybe years ago, probably 3 years ago when I taught the class, like ensemble learning was kind of the peak with respect to machine learning, and neural networks and large language methods had been, had not been fully advanced. But, the thing that's great about ensemble techniques is that if anybody's worked with BERT or any other large language model, they know that, I tweak a parameter here, I tweak a parameter there, or even the random seed that you're using when you fine tune a BERT model will give you different results. And so what's fantastic about ensemble learning techniques is it allows you through Bayesian averaging to combine those disparate answers that you're going to get, and through those combinations, you should get quote unquote closer to the truth with respect to that. So even though the underlying techniques of support vector machine, random forest, et cetera, are not necessarily kind of, I hate to use the phrase state of the art with respect to machine learning. But the idea of ensemble learning is certainly something that has not been fully appreciated within political scientists who are utilizing machine learning, because we still work under this auspice of, BERT tells me the answer is 0.25, and we know for a fact that if we run BERT 5 times, that we're not necessarily going to go from 0.25 to -12, but it'll vary along those parameters. And ensemble methods is precisely a good way to think about how do I deal with those disparate models, which is why I think presenting this method, irrespective of whether or not, it's what people are doing now, I think the idea of ensemble learning is something that you don't see enough of in the machine learning work in political science. So I'll get off my soapbox and open it up to the floor again, and see if anybody else has any questions.
I think Jake has a question. Right?
Sure, go ahead, Jake. I might have missed you. No worries. Jake, did you actually have a question? No is fine. I just wanted to make sure that we're not putting you on oh, I see. Jake sent me through our lab in my lab Slack channel that his computer is frozen, so he will
okay.
deal with that. But yes, does anybody else have a question? Going once, going twice.
I'll be
Sorry.
greedy and jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's possible I missed it, but obviously bureaucracies vary not only in the ideology, which that was really cool to see that I mean, there's so many great sub-analyses and secondary analyses that I really applaud you. I mean, it's what I've come to expect from your group is so many awesome analyses. But what I am curious about is the level of political control of the bureaucracies. And whether you see, heterogeneous effects by, the EPA is, ostensibly more independent than, a cabinet agency or something like that.
That's an interesting question to look at. So yeah, relative independence of bureaucratic agencies is something. Do you have any suggestion for which measurement that we should look at to capture that independence of agencies?
I'm trying to, normally when I ask a question like that, I like have an answer ready to go so that I'm not telling you to do something that I don't know the answer to. I feel like someone has done a continuous measure of like how independent an agency is. And it could actually be as simple as like the percent that is appointed versus,
Yeah.
civil servants, or I forgot
Yeah.
what like on the federal pay
Three
scale.
bureaucrats, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it could be as simple as that. I mean, separate from that, you could also just imagine doing like the sort of textbook like independent agency, dummy, cabinet agency, dummy, government corporation, dummy, like, or you could even make it ordinal if you wanted to, but even just like having those 3 or 4 classifications on the assumption that if, there's an agency head, they're going to be more tied to the president, whereas if it's the FBI, less so. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to say wrong. I would probably like ask a more bureaucracy person than me. But I mean, part of the reason I bring that up is I know that oversight people are going to be really interested in that. Because I mean, like it's one thing, like we can't really control divided government. Like in a lot of ways, it stinks that we get worse information when there's divided government. But like, what are you going to do? Other than that's sort of why I was asking you before about, well, are going to be written comments or something like that. But and you're not going to change political control either, but it might change the way that you're asking questions depending on, depending on who the like how tied to the president that particular agency is.
Yeah, that's certainly another dimension that we should look at and consistent with what the analysis that we present. So yeah, thank you. I will pass that to my co-authors.
All right,
go ahead, Jake.
Thank you. So, I'm not sure if you were calling on me earlier. Sorry, I was frozen for a moment there. But before I get into a question, I kind of want to piggyback off Bryce and applaud you. This is probably the best application of ensemble methods I've seen in a paper that's not just a pure methodology paper. So kudos for that. This was very well written, and I have no doubt that it's going to place very, very, very well. The question I have, and I would like to preface this by stating very clearly that I am not a congressperson, that the fullest extent of my understanding of congressional committees is largely restricted to judiciary committee hearings. But one thing that I was always very interested in with respect to committee hearings is kind of longitudinal developments. And I think you have a fantastic data set for that. And I know that you were saying a few moments ago that you are planning on expanding into even earlier periods in the congressional record.
Right.
And one thing I was very curious about is whether or not you've explored this, or if you have any comments on this, of whether or not this phenomenon has kind of expounded over time. Because I know that the data set you have is obviously post the major polarization, post the major contemporary polarization period. But I was curious if whether or not you've actually seen these periods, kind of these behaviors expound over time. Because I understand, obviously, we're in a polarization period and polarizations become much more strict over time. I was wondering if you're starting to see inklings of that as you move closer to the contemporary era.
Yeah, certainly. I think we received that comment some time ago, but yeah, it's certainly possible to look at the interaction effect of the main key independent variables and the year variable or the Congress variable treated as a numeric variable. Yeah, that's something that we need to look at. We have, but then one thing to note is that although the witness data goes back to 1960s, our hearing transcript data goes on it covers 22-year period going back to 1997. So we only have like 10 Congresses, like 10 to 20, 10 to 12 Congresses. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't want you to take this as you need to add this to the paper, because no, I think this is fantastic as it is. I think it's just as someone who is, I'm not going to say a disinterested observer, just someone who does not focus on Congress. That was like the first question that came to me. I was like, oh, can it be a polarization story? But no, this is fantastic. Kudos to you. Very, very, very well done.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. And we will give Robert Browning the last question, which I think that's how all of these should end, is with the Robert Browning question. So go ahead, Robert.
And he is emphatically, yes, a congressperson.
Yes, that is true.
Okay. Actually, you answered a little bit of my question. I was curious as where you find the 60s data. You say there's just witness data, there's not text data of that. So you go to GovInfo, is that basically where
I got the witness data from ProQuest Congressional. And transcript data is from GPO. And ProQuest has transcript data, but they are in PDFs. So it's picture file, not the text file. So it's really hard to do a text analysis using those PDF files in ProQuest. So, but then expanding the transcript data to start from 1960s, only 5% of the data that ProQuest has. I'm cleaning those PDF files. So I converted PDF files to text. There are so many typos, hard to parse by speaker and speeches. So my RAs are working on that. So it'll cover only the 5% of the entire hearing transcript, but still it'll cover a longest period of time that exists in the academia.
Yeah, that's very good, because I'm doing work with the Congressional Record Index and converting from PDFs, and they have columns, which makes it worse. And you're right. It's heroic work, and it opens up. I mean, so much as you know, so much of our Congress knowledge comes from the 70s, and there was a period where we knew about the 60s and the 50s, but the new research doesn't bring those periods in. So that's commendable.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, I think that's a good note to end our discussion. We have, I guess, 0 minutes now. I will remind everybody that our next iteration of this, the video research workshop, and the last of the semester will be April 19th, Dr. Nathan Kelly, at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. So let's give one more round of applause to Dr. Park. Thank you for coming out, because we very much appreciated the talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you all for attending the talk. See you all.
Bye.
Bye, Julia. See you in a few days.
See you.
Yeah.